All right, everybody, it's Dr. Soni and me, April Summerford, Women's Health and Leadership Coach for the Beyond Endo community. We're with you again, and we're talking about a topic today that's very near and dear to my heart, which is Endo diet in general, but we're going to go into a little bit of a detail on if you can eat red meat. There's a huge question in the community, and I know many of you on the forums, I've seen you over and over talk about the fact that you have endo, you have a new diagnosis, you want to start eating healthier, and you want to start healing your body through food, which, by the way, just let me pause and say, good for you, because that is a huge part of your healing. It's been a big part of my healing journey, healing from endometriosis, cannot be ignored. However, there's so much conflicting advice out there. I wanted to just take apart this tiny piece and try to help you have a better understanding of what's really going on with diet, how you can learn what diet is right for you. And please do not take broad brush advice from people, even though people are being very helpful. And I think that's amazing that on the forums, everyone's helping each other. But everyone almost always says, okay, you have endo, so now red meat needs to be off the list. And that's a pet peeve of mine. And so we're going to talk about why that's a pet peeve of mine. And then Dr. Soni is going to chime in on the health perspectives of why that may not be the best advice for every single woman out there. And definitely ones that have certain issues, which we're going to get into as far as digestive problems and things like that. So anyway, without too much further ado, this is the Can I Eat Red Meat edition, and I can't wait to show you a few different pieces of this puzzle just to hopefully give a different perspective to the fact that we really shouldn't be demonizing meat, and we need to be a little smarter about how we make these diet decisions. So thank you for joining me again, Dr. Soni. I absolutely love spending time with you talking about these fun topics.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. I know a lot of this Can I Eat Red Meat comes from some of the nutrition studies that looked at painful periods in general. And for that, they looked at a very general American population, all types of meat. And so we're going to get into the details here and the type of person which diet is right for. So we'll pick it apart, but I understand where the question comes from.
Totally. And I think that we'll even talk about that. I think there's a time and place where maybe even doing a meat fast for a time isn't a bad idea. And I want to get into some of those things, but I have a pet peeve lately about community in general, us being very black and white when these topics are not black and white. They're actually quite nuanced. And there's actually quite a lot of little bit of things that you have to troubleshoot for your body, which my girls know in my community. They've probably heard me say it enough times. You need to find the diet that's right for you, not the diet that everyone else says is right for them, the one that's right for you.
Yeah, and I totally agree with what you're saying, especially because as women, we're, menstruating every month, we're losing blood. And so for certain women who are anemic or low in iron, cutting out red meat can cause harm.
Right. And so we're going to talk about that. All right, so without too much further ado, let's talk about the basics. So the three major questions that I get in the community pretty frequently, or I observe other women asking in other forums, is, well, isn't red meat inflammatory? Isn't that why we immediately say, okay, if you have endo, you have systemic inflammation, therefore let's just cut red meat out entirely, which we're going to break that question down because I think that's a very important part of this whole discussion. Two is, what are your health goals? So one of the big things I'm going to push over and over until I see mainstream pick it up is like that we're all different, we're bio-individual, and women need to be asked what their health goals are before they're told what diet is right for them from a Facebook forum, for example. And three, the do genes matter is actually a little bit more into the discussion of the fact that we're bio-individuals and that not all diets fit every person because different foods do different things for different people. So I just wanted to bring up a few genes that I think are interesting and that I know I have, and I think many women with endo do have when you look at the literature. So we're just going to kind of dive into those three questions. I'll be honest, this is not a comprehensive analysis. There is so many ways you could slice this discussion, but I really wanted to cover these three discussion points with us today. So first thing, isn't it inflammatory? So let's talk about this, Dr. Soni, because this is the one that I think is the major point where people are really trying to do well by telling women, hey, you have inflammation, you need to eat an anti-inflammatory diet. And then the discussion somehow goes right into, okay, so cut all red meat. So let's talk a little bit about that. Why does that happen, do you think?
So it's because the studies were based on the average American and, the average meat consumed, which in general, it is this pro-inflammatory meat that's, like you have on the slide, raised with hormones, that's corn-fed, like there's some even more toxic things that can go into that. But we have access to organic grass-fed animal meat now, and the ratios of omega-3s and omega-6s are changed in the way that these animals are raised and what they eat. So isn't red meat inflammatory? It's going to be a person-to-person basis.
Right. So that's what I wanted to break down. I live here in California, and I know I want to talk a little bit about this too. I have the privilege of having farmers literally in my back door that I can talk with and have discussions about this on. But I want to bring to the awareness the fact that not all meat is the same. So much like anything you start to learn, not all surgery is the same, not all doctors are the same, not all meat is the same. And so there really is a few different factors on if the meat is going to actually be inflammatory or not with your body. And that depends on the health of the animal, how it was raised, what it was fed, if it was given hormones or had infections, which is a huge piece, and then how you prepare it. I feel like I hear a lot less about how you prepare it, so I wanted to throw that in because it is an important component of making sure that you're having an anti-inflammatory or neutral experience with your protein versus having an actual inflammatory process when you eat it.
Because yeah, and how you prepare a piece, I think that comes from the WHO talking about barbecuing. Anytime you get the carbon on the meat, it does become carcinogenic, and they added red meat into a category as carcinogenic as smoking per se. And so that preparation piece comes in with, is
Totally.
it smoked, or is it being cooked with the healthy anti-inflammatory fats?
Totally. And let's talk about that, because I'm going to go into the omega ratio, because we really can't talk about any of these other pieces until we set this up as an understanding for women. So the first thing is I want people to understand that your body is mostly composed of water, like you're almost 60% water. So a lot of us are water. But then the second highest thing, which people I don't think know, is actually fat. We're mostly water and then fat, and then you get into protein, and then you get into minerals and carbs are like the tiniest percentage of what actually makes up our bodies, right, of the makeup. And so when you look at fats, the omega ratio of how your cell membranes are functioning and how all of your body is functioning is super important for how your body actually functions. So since fat is the number one building block of your body besides water, it definitely is the thing that keeps your cell walls together. It is your cell walls. And it actually helps your hormones function. And those are also mostly fat, which I don't know that people talk about that very often either, but most of your hormones are composed of fat. So if that's the case, which I want to start there, omega-6s are inflammatory and omega-3s are neutral. And so all the studies show a diet high in omega-6s and not much 3 will increase inflammation. And I think this is a big piece of the puzzle because just a few generations ago, our ancestors were not eating these kinds of crazy, like vegetable oil, corn oil, these weird, like manufactured oils. And because of that fact, we have to take into consideration that not all fats are the same, which my girls in my group know I harp on that quite a bit, and I'll keep harping on it. But the same is true of animals. So these animals, when they're eating a lot of corn-based GMO grains, which is my next slide, but when they're eating a lot of these things, they have cell membranes and their body is starting to be composed of inflammatory oils. And when we eat them, the ratio doesn't change. So if the animal was fed poor quality things, has poor quality omega-6 to 3 ratio, we get that same ratio. So the quality of your beef and your red meat, I like a little bit of lamb occasionally, is super important that you know where it comes from, that it was raised sustainably, wasn't given a ridiculous amount of GMOs. And in this list here on the right, people who eat a diet rich in omega-3s, we know experience lower rates of heart attack, depression, schizophrenia, ADHD, Alzheimer's disease. And we do know that also omega-3s have been shown to slow the growth of some cancers. But of course, our Americans' levels are usually too low to be detected. So tell us a little bit about that, Dr. Soni, with your omega-3, omega-6 ratio and inflammation.
Yeah, so the American population is unfortunately typically in this imbalance of the high omega-6 to omega-3. And omega-3, like the EPA component, for example, it is anti-inflammatory. It's incredibly important. And when you think of even breast milk that's used to nourish a developing baby, the difference between human breast milk and other animals' breast milk is that higher proportion of fat, the higher proportion of anti-inflammatory fat. That's why for anyone who is breastfeeding or anyone who is pregnant, the DHA, the omega-3 component, supplementing with it or making sure it's part of your diet is really crucial. I will add, and in fats, even with your supplements and your fish oils or when you're taking them, it's important to look at what is actually in it. because but sometimes when you're supplementing with oils and it's poor quality, they will also throw in the omega-7s and the omega-9s and the omega-8s, all of which you don't really need to be having. Omega-6 is a little bit controversial in that there is a type of omega-6 called GLA, evening primrose oil, that can be okay, and that's where the quality of the fat ends up mattering, the source of the fat ends up mattering. But yes, in general, our American population is skewed in that high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. And so when we think back to the time of being hunter and gatherers, when we were able to eat those fresh vegetables, fresh berries, that's when our diet was more high in omega-3.
That makes total sense. And so let's talk about, I want to talk about the health of the animal, because I know women are now going to ask me, okay, so I can have some red meat, and they're probably going to ask how much, which we're going to get into a little bit of that, or at least have a discussion on it. But the big thing is, now that you're going to go look out sustainably for the type of meat, you probably can't just go to your grocery store and pick up whatever is served there, because most of those beef, the animals that were raised there, beef, lamb, whatever, is raised in factory farmed environments. They're given a high level, which I'm just going to go ahead and go to our next slide. They're typically factory farmed in small confined spaces. They're pumped with antibiotics to keep them from getting sick, which that's because they're being raised in small confined spaces when animals are not meant to be raised that way. And E. coli is a very real thing. I actually just learned this week, which is pretty gross, that the reason why, if you've heard McDonald's beef doesn't decompose naturally, it's because they actually soak it in ammonia. And they do that to kill the E. coli, but then no other bacteria can kill it, which newsflash, your gut is bacteria. So you have to be able to actually break down a meat and actually be able to have that be used as nutrients. So you do not want to be eating meat soaked in ammonia. That's not the best. So you want to make sure that the beef is actually, able to be digested by your gut bacteria. Most of the fat and meat from grain-fed animals is oxidized polyunsaturated omega-6s, which is very inflammatory. And it's at a 14-to-1 ratio. If it has like omega-3, it's a very tiny proportion. So that's just good to know that the ratio is really off there. And then they're typically fed cheap GMO pesticide-laden grains and mold toxins with those grains. And they're typically pumped with hormones to make the animal bigger, also make it grow faster. And then in some cases, in the dairies, it's because they want them to produce, which is a different discussion on dairy, but they want them to produce more milk. And you do end up digesting and receiving whatever those hormones are that the animal was pumped with. So.
And so these are all some of the reasons why I end up, even in the red meats, preferring some of the less conventional types, like lamb or goat, for example, that haven't been factory farmed to this extent yet. Not all red meats are different. And you'll also notice when you eat even a chicken that's been grass-fed versus fed corn, the taste is different. They taste more gamey. You can taste that muscle to fat ratio in the actual animal. You can taste the animal's health.
You totally can. And I feel like I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in cooking, because at the end of the day, this is one of those health swaps that's like, you are missing out if you have not had a purely grass-fed organic steak. It is amazing. And it tastes nothing like factory farm beef. Like when I switched over, I didn't know that I was missing out on this whole other wonderful thing. The health effects is super important, but you can taste it. Your body's like, oh yeah, that's a really good piece of meat. It tastes really good. So free range, typically, I put free range because this is beef we're talking about, and lamb, and more of those types of animals. However, I think we'll do another talk on meat in general and talk about chickens and turkeys and all of those animals too. But in general, you want your animals raised the way they were supposed to be raised naturally in the environment, with grass, with sun. They get vitamin D levels that you actually get to absorb when they're raised in the sun. So we want them out in the grass. We want them feeding most of the time. The fat from grass-fed animals is almost entirely saturated in monounsaturated, which is the healthier fat shown to lower cholesterol levels, which I don't think I've heard very many people talking about that, but that's an interesting fact, that you can lower cholesterol by making sure you're having monounsaturated fats. They have a higher ratio. So their ratio is actually omega is 2-to-1, 2,6 to 1,3. So they have a very clean omega ratio, which is actually on par with most fish, including some wild-caught salmon. So that's pretty healthy. If you think about the Mediterranean diet and you think about all the pros of eating healthy fish, you can get that from beef if you're eating a really high quality piece of meat from a very healthy animal. So typically fed hay, organic feed. And my neighbor, she raises the cows that I eat. She feeds hers hay in the off season, and in the summer, right around now, they're out on the hills just grazing their life away up there, hanging out. So that's how they live, and I know they live that way. And they're never given antibiotics or hormones or any funky pesticide-laden greens. So how you prepare it matters. So there's the health of the animal, there's finding a sustainable source. If you can find a local farmer, if you can go to a farmer's market, there's many farmer's markets that will put you in touch with a farmer who is a local sustainable farmer of cattle or of lambs. I actually have both here. I'm kind of lucky where I moved. There's a lady that actually raises lambs out over here in the corner, and she sends most of them to Texas, I found out. So I was like, hey, can I ever get in on that? Like, do you have to send all the lambs to Texas, or could I eat one? Because, and we're going to talk about, my genes do really well on a little bit of lamb meat here and there. It gives me exactly what I need for my genes to clean properly. So real quick, how you prepare it matters though. So it's not just the quality of the actual animal. You need to prepare it in a way that's not carcinogenic, as Dr. Soni was just saying. So grass-fed meats, and this is just a pro tip here, they cook a lot quicker because they have less fat. And that's probably the other first thing you're going to notice if you switch over to grass-fed, is you're going to notice that you used to have to like cook for a long time, and you'd have to like get all the fat out. And then you'd like, if you were raised with me like a mom like me, you'd pour out all the fat and absorb all the fat, right? And that almost never happens when I cook a piece of grass-fed meat, because they just are not pumped through the same system where they're given all these hormones and they have bad fat ratios. They don't have that. So they don't need to be cooked for a long time. So just be careful with that, because if you overcook meat, it will become oxidized. So just be careful that if you're grilling or frying, that you're not doing it for too long. And honestly, the best way to cook it is actually to bake it, or to use it on a lower heat where you're not going to have that carcinogenic effect. Any comments on that, Dr. Soni, from those studies about carcinogens and how to cook and prepare?
Yeah, so with cooking, the type of oil you use matters. So the heating, the boiling point, the oxidizing point of every single oil is a little bit different. And so in general, avocado oil is a great option. Grapeseed oil is a great option. Olive oil is only typically supposed to have it raw. It's not supposed to be cooked with. And then coconut oil is full of saturated fat, but it does have that high heating point. So it's okay to cook with a little bit. But yes, you know, something like coconut oil can raise cholesterol levels, and yeah, the quality of oil matters. And I also wanted to add, for any vegans or vegetarians watching this video, we do care about you too, and we will help you with what types of nutrients to kind of consider supplementing with if meat is not part of your diet. But I will say, for the average girl, having meat once in a while is a great idea. And that's what we're trying to do here, is let you know the type of meat to have when you are having it.
Totally. And let's talk about that a little more, because I actually do eventually talk about vegans and vegetarians on this final slide, and I want to talk about them because we're not by any means excluding you. I just don't want anyone making their diet decisions based on something someone said on a forum saying, you have endo and now therefore you can't have any meat, because that has not been my experience healing from endo, and it's definitely not my experience from what the research is saying on the fact that we're all bio-individual. So let's go to the next point, and then I want to circle back and talk about them and how they can be supported in their needs. All right, so the next thing we want to look at is the health goals, because this is another big piece for me with women who are asking, what is the best diet for me? And I really want to lean on you on this, Dr. Soni, because I feel like you know a lot more about, as women, why we need certain nutrient levels during our cycle for supporting our hormones. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the first thing that most of us endo girls have to do, and I had to do, is we have to heal our gut. So if women are trying to heal their gut, one of the big things that concern me after watching a lot of women with endo, talking to them and being one myself, is that most of us are actually pretty nutrient deprived, and our gut is not working properly to actually digest foods. It's not uncommon for me to meet women with endo who look like skin and bones, like they're just very, very thin and they can't put on weight. They actually have a hard time gaining weight. They have a hard time holding on to healthy bone and muscle mass. And so in that case, I always think that going vegan or vegetarian would probably be very hard on their digestive system, because it's actually easier for us to metabolize things like beef and lamb, because they're most like our body's proteins. Our body's like, oh, I know what that is, and it knows how to metabolize them. And a lot of other nutrients, especially like we've already talked about, we'll talk about again, but gluten, wheat, casein, cow's milk, soy, and then certain vegetables are actually quite hard to digest. So I would think for a woman who's like, look, my digestive system is barely working, trying to digest a lot of these raw, foods with anti-nutrients that are actually hard to break down could be actually a hard way to go for the gut. Any insight or comments about that?
Yeah, so I will say warm, well-cooked food is really good for the gut. So if you're having that protein in a super stew, that's a great way to get it in. And in addition to that, yes, meat has all the amino acids you need in it. So if you're able to digest that and break that down, I know you're getting a quality meal. If you are vegetarian or vegan, you have to do a little extra work in the components of your plate and making sure they're balanced out for you to get all of the amino acids at that meal. And yes, so the gut is really important in endo girls. And I'll say the reason why it is such an issue, and so often it's an issue, it's because of the history of using anti-inflammatory NSAIDs to help with that endo pain every single month. So at a high dose, those will injure your gut lining, and it is very possible to heal your gut lining. So there's many strategies for that, but something like even cooked cabbage can be really great for your gut lining. Yeah.
Right.
And then the other piece is that we are in the United States. And so for a fact, like the quality of our dairy is worse than that in other countries, especially European countries. And so in general, for the population in the United States, dairy isn't doing much good here. But they are testing now different types of cows. So A1 cows, for example, and seeing if that is a better ratio of the fats. So there is promise for the future, but part of healing the gut is going to be taking out those inflammatory foods. It is very individualized. So we've talked about this before, but an elimination diet is the gold standard to figure out what your sensitivities are. And other than that, there are blood tests to help you identify that. But in general, we do see a lot of gluten and dairy sensitivities here in the United States, as well as soy, corn, because I mean, corn isn't everything.
Yeah. I was talking to a girl this week about that. She's like, is corn the new gluten, April? Like, should we be cutting corn? And I'm like, well, I know that it's been a big trigger for me. And so cutting corn has been a lifesaver of, healing my gut and getting my immune system happy. And I will say that I don't feel like I'm missing out on much because it's not like a major nutrient dense food, which is actually going to be like the next point I'm going to talk about. So it goes well into that. But when you're trying to heal the gut and your body and immune system is completely out of whack, you want nutrient dense foods. So giving up foods that are kind of anti-nutrients, meaning they're actually causing your body more harm than whatever you're getting out of them. And they actually aren't delivering all these wonderful vitamins and nutrients and amino acids. They just kind of become a draw on the system instead of a benefit. So when you're trying to restore your vitamin and mineral deficiencies, you want to eat nutrient dense foods. And so red meat can be a very nutrient dense food if it's, again, from a very healthy, well-raised animal. And once again, they have 2 to 4 as much vitamin A and E as meat from grain-fed cattle. So even we have the omega ratio going on for inflammation. And then we have like, is your body actually getting the minerals and the nutrients from it? Once again, depends on the health of the animal. So if the animal was healthy, yes. If it wasn't, probably not. Another big piece, which we could do literally a whole talk on, I'm sure one day, is the B12 component. And the fact that that's really important for preventing anemia. And as bleeding women who are reproductive every month, we lose a lot of blood. And so anemia is a very real concern for some of us. And also, Dr. Soni, I want you to talk about the genetic component we talked about the other day, because we're going to talk about that next, but how some women actually can tend to be better doing vegan and vegetarian diets versus women who really cannot do well on them because we do not have the proper genes.
Yeah, and the anemia, I would say the iron piece is also important thing for every endo girl to consider and know about themselves. Again, because if the gut lining is not strong, if you're getting bloated all the time, that's a key that you are probably not absorbing nutrients from your diet and you need someone to go in and check. But you're absolutely right. It's incredibly hard to get B12 naturally without meat. Typically, vegans, vegetarians end up needing to supplement it. So yeah, meat is a great source of some of those vitamins there. And liver, for example, the organ meats even, they are going to be extremely rich in vitamin A.
Okay. And then if women are trying to get pregnant too, because I know that's a huge health goal for a lot of them, and just all of the things that pregnancy and conception takes with your choline needs and your methylation cycle. We're going to talk about choline in a bit because it's a passion of mine, but tell us a little bit about if they're trying to get pregnant, if women are trying.
Yeah, we talk about having a fertility diet that is, more nourishing, more rich. And so if you are typically vegan or vegetarian, during that preconception and pregnancy phase, I do typically encourage women to put in a little bit of these meat sources, and if not, up certain supplements. So for example, you're talking about choline. Eggs are a great part of a fertility diet, making sure you are getting the protein and the fats, because it's going to come from you to build another new human pretty soon. And the human body, the nervous system is mainly fat. So we do want to have those good sources.
Right. And most of the brain. So like you have your brain, and then you're developing a whole nother brain that is mostly fat. So you want to make sure those are healthy fats and that you're getting plenty of it in the process. Right.
And the female brain actually shrinks a little during breastfeeding. Oh, wow. Without that extra omega-3, omega-DHA. So we talk about baby brain for breastfeeding moms. It's definitely a thing, and supplements can help you with that.
That's so fascinating. That sounds like another talk one day. So I want to talk just quickly, and I know we only have a few more minutes to go through this. So do genes matter? And the answer is yes. And it's a longer discussion because genes are quite complex, and the way our bodies function is very complex. But I just want everyone to, again, remember that they are all bio-individual, and that they do have different genes, microbiomes, and environments, and nutrient needs. So two of the big genes I've noticed for myself is I have a double MTHFR and a double PMET SNP. And so what that means, and I just wanted to educate on that just really briefly for women who have not delved into this discussion yet. And if you haven't, I'd say get into it because it's fascinating and you'll learn a ton about how your body works. But the MTHFR, and I'm just going to talk about these really briefly, is actually a SNP that 40% of the population have. And typically what that means is that we have a defective MTHFR enzyme. So we produce 30 to 70% less methylfolate than someone with the mutation or without it. So we need extra folate in our diet. And then the other thing is if we don't have enough folate, B9 or B12, which is a huge component from eating meat, it's one of the highest nutrient places to get B12, our choline shortcut is activated, which relies on red meat, fish, poultry, eggs, and organ meats. So if women are not getting those in their diet and they've completely eliminated those for a long period of time, their body is going to have a really hard time with that major methylation factor and the backup mechanism of what helps it function in the event of a deficiency. So again, when we're talking about women who are going vegan or vegetarian, they need to consider that they need supplements with choline and B12 to make sure that those pathways are working. And I would argue that some of us should not be vegans and vegetarians ever because our genes were not made to do that. Our ancestors gave us these genes and they were selected for a reason, and they were eating a very different diet than the diet that we're eating here in America today. So we just need to consider that as an option.
And I love that you bring up this gene. It is a risk factor for miscarriages if you have this MTHFR genotype, which the majority of the population has, and you are deficient in some of these nutrients.
Totally. And let me just talk about the PMET gene as well. So a PMET gene, and I want to go into this one day in a longer discussion because it's so fascinating, but a PMET gene actually has decreased activity by 30% in the SNP if you're like me and you have a double SNP. The issue with that is your parents and your ancestors gave it to you because it had some sort of protective effect. In fact, I was just reading that people who had this gene probably survived malaria. So your ancestors were like, okay, look, we need to give you this genetic SNP so that you can survive malaria. Most of us aren't coming into contact with malaria today, but we are coming into issues of not getting enough choline in our diet. So this gene only works well if it's protective and supported by enough choline in the diet. And I just wanted to bring up, if you don't know if you have a PMET or an MTHFR SNP, that's okay, but there is signs of a dirty PMET SNP, and I hear most women with endo complain about these symptoms, so I just wanted to bring that up if people don't know. So most women with endo tell me all the time they have fatigue, they're at risk or have fatty liver, they're having complications of SIBO, they have gallbladder issues, they're having inflammation and muscle pain, they're having malnourishment due to being cell membranes not being fully functional or damaged. They have pregnancy complications, elevated triglycerides, and muscle weakness. And those are all signs that your PMET gene is not being supported with enough choline in the diet. So I just wanted to bring that up as an interesting case of, I think a lot of us probably have this SNP and we're not supporting with enough choline.
Yeah, I see this all the time, and your gallbladder and liver are critical parts of metabolizing hormones. And so helping that flow of bile through, especially during when you have this gene, is a big part of the endobelly.
Totally. And so just last but not least, how do you get enough choline in your diet? Say if you don't want to go do all the genetic testing. Well, you need it to make phosphatidylcholine, which is our primary component of, like we were talking about, the cell membranes. And you can't properly absorb your nutrients and develop malnutrition most of the time if you're not eating a healthy diet. So during pregnancy and breastfeeding, you need it even more. And if not, you have a risk of developing fatty liver in the long run, as Dr. Soni just said, if your bile isn't moving smoothly out of the gallbladder and aiding digestion, as well as keeping bacteria moving, which is where the SIBO comes in, is the bacteria are not being ushered out of the small intestine. So if you're someone who is thinking about going vegan or vegetarian, you need to make sure you're getting enough choline in your diet. And I would argue that it might even be a good time to break that cycle for just a period of time if you're trying to get pregnant, due to the needs of, like we just said, your brain and your baby's brain. But by all means, do not eat conventional beef. Please eat really healthy, well-raised animals from local sustained sources, because those make a huge difference on the health of you and your baby.
Yeah, and it is possible to get choline through vegetarian diet. You just do need your diet scrutinized. You need certain things checked in your blood. It's possible to check your omega-3 levels. It's possible to check your vitamin B12 levels, your vitamin D levels, your iron, and your ferritin. For every vegan and vegetarian, I would, and even women thinking of getting pregnant, I would check those and make sure you're optimal so that your baby can get the best. And one more piece I'll add in the genes that we haven't talked about here yet, but a percentage of the Caucasian population, 10%, has this condition called hemochromatosis, where you collect and hoard iron. And so it is possible for certain women to be vegan, vegetarian. They have that genetic component where they can handle it. But a lot of what we're seeing is more the deficient, anemic women in endometriosis. And so it's person to person, just like April said, and it's possible to find out what diet is right for you.
If you really want to go hardcore, you could work with Dr. Soni, and we're going to talk about that, to find out if you're the kind of woman who could go vegetarian or vegan, if that's what you want to do. Or, like I said, it's all about your health goals. If you're like, I don't really care what diet I eat, I just want to know what to eat to not be in pain and to be healthy. And so that may be a very different diet for someone like me with certain genetic SNPs and have issues with iron, versus someone who has, and I'm like, man, you're so lucky if you have that gene that hoards it, because you could potentially eat a little bit less meat and probably not have severe symptoms from it, which is pretty cool. So anyway, you need to know what's right for you. We're all different. So there is no endo diet that fits every woman's biological needs. We're all bio-individual. I'll probably have to preach this for years, because it's just not what I'm hearing out there in the general population yet. So there isn't a diet that fits all of us. Not all animals are raised the same. So when someone says conventional meat is bad, they're right, but they haven't looked at the benefits or the costs of maybe looking at a healthy animal and what that might do for their health. And anyone saying all women should remove all red meat from their diets is being way too broad brush in general for me. So just be careful about that, and please think through what's best for you. And then please, if you are a vegan or vegetarian and you're watching this or you're thinking about becoming one, please work with a doctor to make sure you have the right nutrients and biomarkers to support your body accordingly. And Dr. Soni is a great person to work with to help you do that, so that you know that you're not in a nutrient deficient state and you have what you need. And please, please, please find what works for you and your health goals. Do not just take someone's advice off the internet. Don't even take our advice. Please test it and find out what's going to work best for you on your healing journey. All right, how do they find you to book that appointment and find out what nutrient levels they need, Dr. Soni?
Yeah, I love helping women with endometriosis heal from a root cause perspective, heal that chronic pain holistically. So that's my website, and feel free to give my clinic a call and we'll be in touch with you.
Awesome. And then for women who are watching this and you want a supportive, positive community to help you through this healing process, join us on Facebook. We're at a Facebook group called Beyond Endo. And you can also follow me over at beyond.endo on Instagram. And my goal is just as an endo survivor to help other women through this process and heal as quickly as possible to get back to doing all the things that you were really meant to do in this world, which was not be on the couch in pain. So I want you to go be world changers and do all the amazing things that you want to do. And you can't do that when you're in pain. I know that firsthand. So that's why I set up this community. So anyway, join both of us. Dr. Soni on Instagram is the Endo Doc. And I am, as I said, Beyond Endo. So follow us, get involved with us. We're always getting new information out there, new content. And we also are working on some resources in the background to help you even more. So stay with us. We're gonna keep helping you through this. I hope you found that helpful. Don't forget to check out our other videos on endo belly and how to detox your home. And also, if you found this valuable, don't forget to click the subscribe button and the bell to get notified every time I release a new video on how you can heal from endometriosis and pelvic pain. It is possible, and I'm here to support you on the journey. So don't forget to join our community over at Beyond Endo, and I'll see you over there on Facebook. Bye.